Even the most memorable experiences have their flaws, keeping it to one per franchise and a spoiler warning to boot. Here is one thing I hated in JRPGs I loved, starting with Issei Lacrimosa of Dana and its raids. Issei is one of my favourite games of all time, many of my frequent viewers know this. It is the embodiment of everything I look for in a fast-paced action RPG, while also putting heavy focus on the adventure archetype that Ys games are so adept at. The journey through the Isle of Seiren is largely a memorable time, especially as the mystery of the land begins to unravel. However, the one thing that does take away from this are the periodic raids that will pop up as you progress. Raids are literally as they sound, collective assaults by enemies on your home base that force you to come back and deal with them, though in actuality, only a couple are mandatory. The goal of these raids are to simply beat the enemies back. You're put in a set arena and you run wild, taking down anything dumb enough to run into your blade. And for people who simply dig the gameplay, these could be an enjoyable time. For me though, they often took away from the flow of what I was doing at a given point. I don't want to be forced to go back to base, I want to explore the island further and dig up the secrets it has to offer. And fortunately, as said before, they are not mandatory, though the rewards that they offer up make them fairly important to do in terms of progression, not to mention the more you do, the easier it will be to unlock the true ending. So really, it's in your interest to do a fair few of them, if only to increase your chances of seeing the canonical ending. Issei had very few flaws in my eyes, but this was certainly one of them. Moving on to Persona 5 Royal, and it's the fight against Okamura. I dare say the fifth palace in this excellent game sparks dread and anger in players who had the displeasure of experiencing it, not because of the palace itself, which I like quite a bit, but more because of its final boss Kumikazu Okamura. The cool thing for the most part in Persona 5 Royal is that Atlus looked to make each of its bosses unique, breaking away from the standard approach to battles and assigning specific strategies to each, like interacting with the environment or having notably different phases. However, when the aim is to be creative and novel for each encounter, there will inevitably be one or two that derail from the tracks, and Okamura is the wrecked locomotive at the bottom of the valley. While pretty much every boss in Persona 5 Royal has a defining gimmick, this one has too many of them, to the point they even start to work against each other. For example, it was clear that Atlus wanted this battle to be cinematic, hence why it's peppered with a bunch of unskippable cutscenes. Not a problem by itself, but add in a 30-minute time limit that will continue to run down even when the cutscenes are in motion, and that's just a case of conflicting design. If control is taken away from the player, the timer should at least be stopping as a concession. And that's what this fight comes down to. It's an amalgamation of player hostile mechanics. You're not actually fighting Okamura himself for the most part, instead you're fighting a bunch of minions in waves. The issue though is that these minions must be taken down at the same time. If any of them are left standing come the end of the round, the whole wave resets, effectively meaning it becomes a battle of attrition. This fight is all about preparation, and even if you do have a lineup to circumvent the various mobs that show up, there's still a degree of luck involved, as Okamura can order them to self-destruct, which will also reset the wave. It's a notable difficulty spike in a game that for the most part is quite tame, and while some of the battle design is fine in that it wants you to make full use of the kit on offer to you at this point in the game, notably baton passes, there's just a bunch of annoyance there as well that borders on frustrating. The cherry on top is when you actually consider the easiest method around this problem. If a boss battle is causing us trouble, we are fortunate in that for many cases we can lower the difficulty to overcome it. Not here. In fact, to make the battle easier, you increase the difficulty. Pump that baby up to merciless and you'll have an easier time, because by doing so, you will increase not only the enemy damage, but more importantly, your own. So if you do need that extra boost, this is your trump card to get around it, as ridiculous as it sounds. Thankfully, when you actually get to Okamura himself at the 7th phase, he's pathetically weak. In fact, the fight becomes easier once you've knocked out the multi-minion waves. But I still remember this fight being the stuff of nightmares, and I think Atlus were just giving you a freebie when you got past all the bullshit. Up next is Cold Steel and the battle to retake 4's military academy. Cold Steel 2 is by no means my favourite Trails game, in fact it's one of my least favourites, but even the lesser games in the series still hold a special place for me, and the second game in the Erebonian arc is no exception. Cold Steel 1 ended with the takeover of 4's military academy and the beginning of the Civil War. One in-game month later, Reen and friends decide to take on the role of a third faction to effect the war in their own way, and one of their key objectives is to retake their school. Now the objective itself itself is fine, it's a driving force for much of the game, and the actual conflict takes on an interesting approach too. Rather than a full-on melee between two factions, it's more a personal fight between Class 7 and Class 1, and it's clear that its purpose is to simply break down the barrier between commoner and noble, which in of itself is a key theme of the Cold Steel arc. I don't mind that as the ultimate conclusion of the retaking of 4s, in fact I appreciate it in some ways. However, I couldn't help but feel that the actual events that formed the battle were anticlimactic. A couple of soul darts and then a fight against Class 1 themselves, and that's it. It needed a bit more considering how important this was to a fair chunk of the plot in Cold Steel 2. It just makes the whole sequence forgettable as compared to the later developments, which is unfortunate considering how important it was from the offset. Up next is Fire Emblem Three Houses and the need to repeat the first half of the story every single time just so you can see the new content specific to the different houses. It's the one thing that is preventing me from playing through the game a third time because it's just a chore on later playthroughs. The monastery is cool as a concept, once. However, revisiting it with only the class members changing isn't enough to draw me in for another 12 to 15 hours just so I can see the content specific to that house. You could argue that this was needed as a mechanic just so the new members get some characterization before the developments later on, but there had to be a better way than this. Maybe just a few changes during the opening sequences, or heck, even just having 4 unique stories altogether. It remains the one thing that prevents me from playing through again, and I'm not sure when I'll go back, if ever. For some, the gameplay is enough to see themselves through, but not for me. I need a bit more than seeing the same events again for the first half, and to be honest, I'll probably just watch the 2 remaining routes on YouTube some other day. Shifting focus to a dating sim hybrid now, it's the 2019 version of Sakura Wars, specifically its combat, like all of it. This reboot wasn't just an attempt by Sega to put Sakura Wars back on the map, they also shifted the gameplay from strategic to a straight up action-centric style. Now while it looks cool, I brought it up in my review from last year that it's just hopelessly shallow. Combo opportunities are limited, there's no upgrades to be made to the mechs themselves, no leveling, and very little customization outside of aesthetics. It feels more like a Musou title in the way it goes about its combat as you mow down hordes of enemies, and that got old fast, especially when adding in the uninspired level design which amounted to little more than drab hallways. Saying that, this was not the focus of the game, and it was more than held up by its excellent animation and charming cast of characters which took the spotlight instead. And that is high praise indeed, for that was the main reason I stuck around and also the reason why it eventually ended up on my favourite games list of 2022. But if they do bring back Sakura Wars for another round, which I do hope happens, they'll either need to polish the gameplay and give it some depth, or just revert back to the strategic formula. Up next is the Atelier series, specifically the first Riser game, and its notable difficulty spike come the final bout. Now admittedly, this is the one that I'd say didn't bother me as much as the others on this list, simply because it taught me that overcoming an Atelier game isn't about your level, rather it's about your equipment. Riser was my first game in the series, and it subsequently became the basis for my now positive outlook on the series as a whole, and an admiration for Gust as a developer. But with that introduction, it also demonstrated its notorious jump in difficulty as the final moments closed in, something that Atelier games are infamous for. And I'll admit it did frustrate me at first as I felt I was beating my head against the wall. Why couldn't I beat this guy despite maxing out my levels? And then I realised those levels meant nothing. The true stat growth came entirely from the equipment I was wearing, and that's where I started to truly understand what Riser and Atelier was all about. Sure enough, once I had crafted the equipment with the stronger attributes and traits, it was an absolute cakewalk, and felt very satisfying as if I had been enlightened, and I owe this boss fight for teaching me that in a very brutal way, that sometimes just going about it in the conventional way will not cut it. Moving on, we have Dragon Quest XI and its repetitive soundtrack. I've expressed my, let's say, indifference for the OST on offer from Sugiyama & Co, and I'll continue to stick by that mindset. People have tried to convince me that it's actually good, that the MIDI soundtrack is why I had a bad time, that I should listen to the orchestral version and I'll change my mind. No, I played with orchestral renditions and it's just not good. The main problem is that it's far too repetitive. The actual scope of songs on offer is tiny compared to the scale of the game. It's absolutely wonderful going into a field map and just getting that blaring trumpet immediately upon loading in. Every single time. Battle tracks aren't much better, nothing to hype me up with this, and you get the same music for the towns you visit, so there's no individuality outside of the designs themselves. It was a big reason why I abandoned the game initially, and when I came back I muted the music and just listened to my own Spotify list composed of Falcon renditions. And let me tell you, playing through DQ11 with Blue Destination as opposed to the standard fare did wonders. I actually binged the game all the way to the end. Absolutely crazy that the rest of the game was fantastic and was dripping in polish, but just one element that I put a lot of importance on was enough to make me put it down for over a month. Next up, we have Xenoblade Chronicles and its overabundance of useless quests. I thank the high heavens that I am not a completionist, because I'm pretty certain I'd lose my mind with Xenoblade Chronicles. Again, a fantastic game, one of my favourites, but the amount of meaningless side quests is just ludicrous. The rewards are so often not worth it for the time you put in. Eventually, it got to the point where I only took quests from named NPCs, as they were generally the only ones that had substance to them. The ones from unnamed sources were very often the collect this amount of resource and I'll give you a pitiful amount of XP, while the named variants had quests with their own little side stories attached, and those were fine to partake in. It all came down to substance. Many of the quests in Xenoblade Chronicles 1 lacked quality. They didn't have the pull to make me want to do them, and thankfully very often I wouldn't have to do them anyway. The natural progression from just following the main story and exploring the maps was sufficient. It seems that this particular element was at least somewhat improved in the two direct sequels. Last of all, we jump to SMT3 Nocturne and its dreaded cursed corridors as part of the Kalpas. The Kalpa dungeons are well known to those who pursued the true demon ending in SMT3 Nocturne, an ending which I would argue is the best of the lot. However, on certain levels of these Kalpas, you'll find eerie looking corridors which are pretty much terror incarnate. Nocturne as a game is already quite unforgiving. A couple of missteps is all it takes for the whole house of cards to come crashing down and you losing a fair chunk of progress as you can't save wherever you want. The problem with the cursed corridors is that they have a very nasty side effect when you go through them, in that they will drain your health down to 1 in a matter of seconds. Now the issue isn't that it drains your health, it doesn't actually cause you to die, rather all it does is take one bad encounter where the enemy gets the jump on you, and that's it, you're getting a game over. Adding on to this cruelty is that the corridors themselves are puzzles. Going through a wrong door will cause you to end up at an earlier point of the hallway, thus prolonging your suffering. Indeed, there are ways to circumvent this. Estoma and Trifuri as a combo will generally be enough, but of course Estoma as a mechanic only works if the enemy is lower leveled than the Demi-Fiend. So as a result, I waited until I was about to enter the Tower of Kagutsuchi, the game's final dungeon, before I even contemplated tackling the rest of the Kalpas, just to minimise the frustration. And even then, I was still sweating buckets knowing that one moment of bad luck could end it all. Admittedly, they are optional, but who's going to pass up on 250,000 marker if you succeed? All I can say is that the developers were definitely demonstrating their sadistic tendencies. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.